The city was silent, too silent. Snow covered the streets like a thick, cold blanket, hiding the cracks and ruins beneath. She walked slowly, her boots leaving prints that would soon vanish in the wind. Every building she passed seemed frozen in time, windows shattered, doors swinging in the icy breeze. Once this place had been alive, children laughing, vendors shouting, lights flickering in the night. Now it was empty. Only the cold remained, sharp and unyielding. It was as if the world itself had abandoned her. Her coat was thin, worn from months of use. She wrapped it tighter around her small frame, trying to keep warmth inside, though it barely worked. Her fingers were stiff, her nose red from the wind, but the cold that touched her bones was worse than the air. The cold inside her heart, the hollow ache of loss, was impossible to cover with cloth. Her family was gone. Her home was gone. Even the friends she once laughed with had disappeared. She didn't know how long she had been alone, and it didn't matter anymore. Time felt meaningless when everything that once mattered had been taken. She stopped by a broken fountain in the town square. The water had frozen mid-flow, sharp icicles hanging like teeth. She crouched and touched the ice with her bare fingers, and a shiver ran down her spine. Memories came unbidden, the warmth of her mother's hand, the laughter of her brother as they ran through puddles, the smell of bread baking in the oven. It all seemed like another lifetime, another world she would never reach again. A tear froze on her cheek before it could fall, a small crystal in a world of white and gray. The wind screamed through the empty streets, carrying with it the remnants of broken lives. She hugged herself, wishing for something, anything, that could bring back what she had lost. Sometimes she thought she could hear whispers of the past, voices calling her name, laughter echoing from nowhere. But every time she turned, there was nothing. Only silence, only snow. It was a cruel trick of the mind, a reminder that she was alone. Food was scarce. She had learned to survive on scraps found in abandoned stores and forgotten homes. She had learned to ignore the hunger in her stomach, to ignore the pain in her legs, to ignore the constant ache in her chest. Survival had become mechanical, a routine of moving from one place to another, checking the wind, checking the sky, checking for danger. Danger could be animals, other humans, or the cold itself. Each day was a test, and some days she failed. Some nights she would curl up in a corner, shivering until her body ached, wondering if she would wake up at all. Yet despite everything, she kept moving. She didn't know why. Perhaps it was stubbornness, perhaps it was instinct, perhaps a small flicker of hope she refused to recognize. Every building she passed, every street she crossed, she imagined it filled with life again. She imagined laughter echoing through the alleys, imagined smells of food and firewood, imagined someone waiting for her. That thought was both cruel and comforting. It reminded her of what she had lost, but it also reminded her that life could exist again somewhere. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the frozen city, she found herself standing at the edge of a small park. The trees were bare, their branches scratching the gray sky like fingers. Snow piled on their limbs, bending them low, heavy with the weight of winter. She sat down on a fallen log, pulling her knees close. The cold seeped through her coat, through her skin, into her very soul. She hugged herself tightly, wishing she could wrap the world in warmth, if only for a moment. She closed her eyes, listening to the silence. No birds, no wind through leaves, no distant laughter, just snow, just cold, just emptiness. And yet somewhere deep inside, a small, stubborn spark remained, a tiny flicker of something she couldn't name. It was faint, easily buried beneath fear and loss, but it was there. She didn't know what it meant. Perhaps it was hope. Perhaps it was just the stubborn desire to see another day. Either way, it was enough to keep her moving, one careful step at a time, through a city that had taken everything she loved. The night fell fast, bringing darker cold with it. Stars peeked through the clouds, distant and indifferent. She wrapped her arms around herself, whispering a soft promise to survive, to keep moving, even if the world had forgotten her. Somewhere she knew warmth still existed. Somewhere, perhaps, life still waited. She only had to find it. And so, despite her trembling, despite the emptiness, despite the unending cold, she walked onward. The night was bitter, the wind cutting through her coat like a blade. She walked through the empty streets, her breath forming clouds that vanished into the darkness. Her body ached, her stomach groaned, but she kept moving. The city had been silent all day, lifeless and gray, yet now through the shadows of broken buildings, she noticed a faint flicker of light. It was small, almost hidden, coming from a building whose windows were cracked and boarded. Her heart skipped a beat. Light in this city was rare. Life in this city was rarer. For a moment, fear stopped her. She had learned long ago that not all signs of life were safe. Humans could be cruel, animals could be hungry, and even warmth could hide danger. She crouched behind a pile of rubble, watching. The light moved slightly, and she could see a figure inside, a human silhouette tending to something by the fire. The sight was surreal. A fire, warmth, and someone alive, it felt impossible. Her lips parted, and a part of her, the part that had almost died inside, trembled with hope. She approached slowly, each step cautious, her fingers clutching the straps of her coat. Every instinct screamed to stay hidden, to flee, but the light drew her in. It was not just warmth she saw, it was safety, something she hadn't felt in months. She paused at the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. The human looked up, and their eyes met. There was no shock, no fear, only a gentle curiosity. And then a small smile appeared, a smile that seemed almost magical in the darkness. "Come in," the human said softly. The voice was calm, warm, like a blanket she had been denied for years. She hesitated, her hand frozen on the doorframe. Memories of betrayal, of nights when she had trusted and been abandoned, flashed through her mind. Could she really step inside? Could she believe that kindness still existed? Her body shook, but the cold outside was unbearable, and the fire inside called to her. Slowly, she moved forward, stepping into a world that felt like a dream. The warmth hit her first, wrapping around her like an embrace she didn't know she remembered. It was a fire, yes, but more than that, it was hope. The room smelled of wood smoke and something comforting she could not name. The human had already placed a blanket on a chair and without a word gestured for her to sit. She sank down, her knees pulled to her chest, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle over her. She hadn't realized how much she had been carrying, how much she had been running until now. He handed her a bowl of soup. Steam rose and filled her nose with the scent of warmth, of life, of care. She took it with trembling hands, unsure if she had permission to accept it, unsure if it was real. Each sip was like drinking sunlight, like swallowing hope itself. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth seep into her bones. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like she was surviving. She felt like she was alive. The human watched her carefully, offering nothing more than presence and patience. That was enough. Hours passed. They didn't speak much, but she noticed small things, the way he kept the fire steady, the careful way he prepared his own meal, the way he hummed softly to himself. It was simple, ordinary, yet extraordinary to her. She realized how lonely her life had been, how much she had taken even small gestures for granted. This human had given her a room, a fire, a meal, and something she had not dared to hope for in a long time: safety. She wanted to ask questions, to speak, but words failed her. She could only stare at the fire, letting her mind wander to places she hadn't allowed herself to think about for months. She remembered warmth, laughter, stories told before sleep. It was all distant now, but the spark was returning, igniting slowly, tentatively, like the first light of dawn. Finally, the human spoke again. "You can stay as long as you need," he said. No conditions, no questions, no judgment, just safety. The simplicity of it made her chest tighten. She nodded silently, unable to speak, and felt a tear slip down her cheek. It didn't matter if he saw it. She had found something she hadn't realized she had been seeking, a place where she belonged, even if only for tonight. As the fire crackled, shadows dancing on the walls, she understood something. She had wandered through the cold, through emptiness, through a world that had taken everything from her. But maybe, just maybe, she had found the first hint of warmth again. It was small. It was fragile. But it was enough to keep her moving, enough to give her a reason to hope. Outside, the wind continued to howl. Inside, a human offered light in the darkness, a spark of life in a city that had almost forgotten it existed. And for the first time in a long while, she dared to believe that not all was lost. The morning light spilled through the cracked windows, soft and pale, falling on the worn wooden floor. She lay curled on the blanket, feeling the warmth seep into her frozen muscles. For the first time in months, she had slept without shivering, without fear pressing down on her chest like a weight too heavy to lift. But even as the warmth surrounded her, doubt lingered. Could she trust this human? Could she believe that kindness could exist in a world that had shown her so much cruelty? He was already awake, moving quietly around the room. There was no rush, no expectation. He hummed softly as he tidied a corner, and she watched from the blanket, cautious yet curious. His presence was calm, steady, like a steady flame that would not falter. She had almost forgotten what it felt like to be near someone who didn't demand, judge, or threaten. Her eyes followed him as he prepared a simple breakfast, bread and soup, small things that suddenly seemed luxurious. When he noticed her watching, he smiled gently. "Morning." he said softly, gesturing for her to come closer. She hesitated, her body stiff. Her first instinct was to pull away, to retreat to the safety of silence and solitude. But the hunger in her stomach and the warmth of the room called louder than fear. Slowly, she moved toward the small table, every step cautious, as if testing whether the world had changed overnight or whether she was dreaming. He offered her a piece of bread and a cup of tea. She took them with trembling hands, not sure if she had permission to eat, unsure if accepting this care was right. The warmth of the food spread through her, pushing against the emptiness inside. As she ate, she noticed small details, the careful way he poured the tea, the soft clink of the cup against the table, the way his eyes followed her with quiet patience. It was ordinary, yet extraordinary. She had survived so long on her own, that even small gestures of attention felt miraculous. "You don't have to speak if you don't want to," he said, his voice gentle, understanding. "But I'm here, you're safe here." The words were simple, but they struck something deep within her. Safety had been a stranger for so long, almost a fantasy. She had learned to trust only herself, to rely only on her own strength, yet this human offered her more than protection. He offered patience, acceptance, and the simple presence of someone who cared. She wanted to speak, to tell him who she was, where she had come from, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she nodded faintly, letting him understand without explanation. As the day wore on, she explored the small room she now called a shelter. Books lined one shelf, dusty but intact. A few blankets were folded neatly in a corner. Simple things, but they suggested a life existed here, a life that had continued despite the cold and emptiness outside. She noticed that he moved with quiet care, tending to the fire, cleaning the small stove, humming occasionally. Every action was deliberate, unhurried, yet full of thoughtfulness. She realized she had almost forgotten what attention without demand felt like. Hours passed. They did not speak much, yet a rhythm developed between them. She learned to accept small gestures, a smile when she reached for the cup of soup, a blanket draped over her shoulders when she shivered. She began to notice her own responses, her body relaxing slightly, her heart no longer racing at every movement or sound. Trust, she realized, was not a sudden thing. It grew quietly, step by step, gesture by gesture. In the evening, he brought her to the small window and gestured outside. Snow had begun to melt, sunlight reflecting off the ice in small, sparkling diamonds. "It's a small world out there," he said softly. "But it's not too late. You can have a place in it again if you choose." Her chest tightened. She wanted to believe him, but fear lingered like a shadow. She had lost so much. Could she allow herself to hope? Could she allow herself to belong somewhere, even with him? Slowly, she realized that she wanted to. It terrified her, but a small, stubborn part of her longed to trust, longed to accept warmth without fear. That night, she slept differently. The fire burned steadily, and he hummed softly nearby. She did not curl into herself as tightly as before. She did not listen for danger in the shadows. Instead, she let herself feel, just for a moment, what it meant to be safe. And for the first time in a long while, she understood. Trust was not surrender. It was a choice, fragile and tentative, yet powerful enough to begin healing what the cold had taken. She did not speak, she did not explain, but she let herself stay. And in that quiet acceptance, a small ember of hope began to glow within her heart, a spark that had survived the long, cruel winter and now had a chance to grow. The days blended together, soft and quiet, broken only by the occasional crackle of the fire. She began to notice small patterns in the human's life. The way he moved through the room, the care he took in every action, the little routines that brought order to the chaos outside. For the first time, she realized that life could exist, even in a broken city, even after loss and cold had taken everything. Yet she still hesitated to fully open her heart. The past weighed heavily on her, like a shadow that refused to lift. She had lost so much. Memories came in fragments, her family laughing at dinner, the smell of fresh bread in the morning, the warmth of her mother's embrace. Each memory was a stab of both joy and pain. She had wandered through the city, carrying these fragments like pieces of a broken mirror, unable to fit them together. The human had never asked about them, never pressured her to share, yet somehow, his quiet presence encouraged her to remember to speak, to release what had been trapped inside for so long. One evening, she finally spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper, hesitant, as if it had been unused for years. I had a family," she said, staring at the fire. "They're gone now." She paused, swallowing the lump in her throat. The cold, it took them, and I walked alone after that. The human didn't respond immediately. He simply sat across from her, listening. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, steady, without pity or judgment. "I'm sorry," he said. "I can't imagine what you went through, but you're not alone anymore, not here, not with me." Her chest tightened. She had been alone for so long that the idea of not being alone felt foreign. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time she saw not just a stranger, but someone who had chosen to care. Someone who had built warmth not just in his home, but in the space around her heart. It was fragile, this connection, but it was real. In the days that followed, she began to open more. She told him about the small joys she had once known, the friends who had laughed with her, the games she played as a child. She spoke of the nights when she had cried alone, of the hunger, the cold, the fear. He listened without interruption, without offering easy answers, simply absorbing her stories like precious treasures. Each tale, each fragment of memory, was another layer of trust being rebuilt. And slowly she began to notice changes within herself. She laughed quietly at a story he shared, the sound strange but not unwelcome. She moved with less caution around him, no longer flinching at every sudden noise. Her eyes, once dull and wary, began to shine with curiosity, with life. The fire in the room seemed to spread into her very soul, melting the frost that had settled there over the long months of loneliness. Yet even as she healed, the past remained. Some nights she would wake up, trembling, haunted by shadows of memories she could not escape. She would wrap herself tightly in blankets, listening to the wind, fearing the emptiness outside. But he was always there, patient, steady, a silent anchor in the storm of her mind. He would hum softly, tend to the fire, offer warmth without question, and slowly she would breathe again. One evening she looked around the small room and realized she had begun to call it home. It was not grand, not luxurious, but it was safe. It was a place where she could exist without constant fear. The human did not demand anything from her, and yet he had given her everything she needed: safety, warmth, and the space to heal. She realized that the world outside was still harsh, still cold, but here, in this fragile room filled with firelight, she had found something the cold could never take: a chance to live again. For the first time in months, she felt a sense of peace. Not complete, not permanent, but enough to let her rest, to let her hope. She had survived the past, she had survived the cold, and now she was beginning to survive herself. The human had not just given her warmth, he had given her the courage to face the past without letting it destroy her, and the strength to accept a fragile, beautiful present. As the night fell, shadows danced on the walls, and she rested near the fire. She closed her eyes, feeling the steady rhythm of her heart, the warmth of the room, and the quiet presence of someone who cared. She had been broken, shattered by loss and cold, but in this small, fragile room she was beginning to feel whole again. And that feeling, delicate as it was, filled her with a quiet, stubborn hope that she had thought was lost forever. The wind howled louder that night than she had ever heard before. Snow whipped against the broken windows, piling high in drifts that pressed against the walls like icy hands. She lay curled under the blanket, heart racing as the storm raged around them. The fire flickered, casting shadows that danced on the walls, but it seemed too small to fight the fury of the night. Her body trembled, not just from the cold outside, but from fear. The memory of months spent alone, of nights when the cold had almost claimed her life, surged back in an unstoppable wave. She tried to stay calm, telling herself that the human was here, that he had built this place to keep them safe. Yet the wind's scream echoed inside her, louder than reason. Each gust rattled the walls and made her flinch. Snow seeped through cracks in the window, settling in small, icy flakes on the floor. She pulled the blanket tighter around her, her teeth chattering despite the fire. The storm was relentless, and for a moment it felt as if the cold itself had returned to punish her for daring to hope. The human did not panic. He moved with steady hands, tending to the fire, adding logs, adjusting the blankets. His voice was calm, a soft hum beneath the roar of the storm. "It's okay," he said gently, placing a warm hand on her shoulder. She flinched at first, the instinct to retreat ingrained from months of solitude. But the touch was not harsh, not demanding. It was gentle, steady, alive. She felt a small spark of reassurance, fragile yet undeniable, igniting in her chest. Minutes stretched into hours. The storm battered the building, and she could hear branches snapping outside, snow sliding from the roof in heavy sheets. Her mind raced, imagining the worst: walls collapsing, fires dying, the cold seeping in to claim her once more. She clutched the blanket, squeezing it against her chest, and closed her eyes, trying to shut out the world. But then the human's voice broke through her fear. "Look at me," he said softly. Hesitant, she opened her eyes. He knelt beside her, carefully lifting her hands from the blanket. "You're here, I'm here, the fire is here, you're safe." The simplicity of his words struck her harder than any storm outside. Safety. It was a concept she had almost forgotten. Someone saying she was safe felt like a miracle, like sunlight piercing through endless clouds. Slowly, her body relaxed, trembling still, but with a new awareness. She was not facing this storm alone. He wrapped her in an extra blanket, holding her close as she leaned against him. The warmth of his body, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, pushed back the cold more effectively than fire or walls. She let herself breathe, letting the panic slip away in tiny increments. The storm still raged, but inside she felt a fragile shield forming, made not of wood or fire, but of trust and care. She realized with quiet awe that no storm, no matter how fierce, could overcome the presence of someone who chose to protect her. Hours passed. She whispered about her fear, and he listened, never interrupting, never judging. She told him about nights she had thought she would freeze to death, about moments when hunger had almost broken her spirit. His hands held hers, steady, grounding her. Each word she spoke was a release, and with each release, a small piece of the terror the cold had inflicted melted away. She understood then that warmth was not just fire or shelter. It was patience, attention, and the willingness to stand beside someone when everything else threatened to destroy them. By the time the storm began to ease, the room was quiet, save for the crackle of the fire. Snow lay deep outside, but inside, a fragile peace had settled. She leaned her head against him, feeling the soft rise and fall of his chest, and let herself rest. The storm had tested her, had brought her closest to the fear and loneliness she had carried for months, yet she had survived. Not alone, not this time. As the first light of dawn broke through the clouds, painting the snow in gentle gold, she realized something profound. The cold had returned to threaten her, but it had failed. Because even in the darkest, most relentless storms, there were humans capable of defying it, capable of offering warmth, courage, and hope. And for the first time in a long while, she understood that survival was not just about enduring the cold. It was about allowing someone to help you fight it. The storm had passed, leaving the city blanketed in sparkling snow that reflected the gentle morning light. She stepped outside for the first time in days, the cold still biting, but different now, less threatening, less cruel. The fire in the room, the human's presence, had changed something inside her. She no longer felt like prey wandering a frozen wasteland. She felt alive, cautious, yes, but alive, and that was a feeling she had almost forgotten. He followed her outside, a small smile on his face, carrying 2 steaming cups of tea. The warmth seeped into her fingers as she took one, and for the first time she noticed how simple things could feel extraordinary. Sunlight glinted off the ice, painting the world in gold, but it was the warmth in the cup and the warmth beside her that she treasured most. For months she had chased survival, but now she realized that warmth was more than physical. It was trust, attention, presence, and care. They walked slowly along a narrow street, their boots crunching in the snow. She observed the buildings, the broken windows, the abandoned shops, yet the fear she had carried for so long felt lighter. Each step she took beside him, she felt stronger, as if his steady presence bolstered her courage. When she glanced at him, he offered a reassuring nod, and she felt her heart swell with gratitude she had never dared to feel before. Life had returned to her in quiet, subtle ways. Inside the small room later, she sat near the fire, her hands stretched toward the flames. He had prepared a simple meal, but it wasn't the food that made her feel full. It was the thought behind it, the care in every action. She watched him, noticing how natural his patience was, how effortlessly he created a space where fear could not thrive. She had survived alone for so long, relying only on herself, but now she realized she could lean on someone else, and that did not make her weak. It made her human. He hummed softly, a tune that had become familiar, comforting, a background to her days. She found herself humming along quietly, almost shyly, and a laugh escaped her lips, a sound she had almost forgotten she could make. He looked at her and smiled, not mockingly or with surprise, but with warmth that made her cheeks burn. She realized then that laughter was a form of survival too. It was proof that the cold, the loneliness, and the fear had not completely claimed her. They spent hours talking, sharing stories of past and dreams of future. She spoke hesitantly at first, then more freely about the small joys she had known, the friends she had lost, and the world she had once loved. He listened without interruption, without judgment, allowing her to place her memories and fears into the room like fragile treasures. She realized that this attention, this patience, was a rare kind of warmth, stronger than fire, stronger than clothing, stronger than shelter. It was connection, and she felt it deeply. As the sun dipped low in the sky, they moved to the small window. Snow glistened outside, and for the first time she saw the city differently. It was still broken, still empty, but there was possibility in its silent streets. Together they watched the light change, and she leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling safe, cherished, and alive. The warmth she felt was no longer just physical. It was trust, care, and hope, things she had thought lost forever. She realized she had begun to look forward to each day, not because survival demanded it, but because life had returned to her in subtle ways. A smile, a touch, a shared laugh, the quiet presence of someone who cared. The human had given her not only safety, but something far deeper, faith that she could live again, love again, and trust again. That warmth, she understood, was more powerful than any fire, more enduring than any storm. Night fell and she curled near the fire once more. She watched the flames dance and thought about the days ahead. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future, a fragile but beautiful future. She didn't know what challenges awaited, but she knew one thing: she would face them not alone. He had shown her that even in the coldest, loneliest places, warmth could survive, hope could survive, and so could she. And for the first time in a long while, she smiled without fear, without hesitation, and felt the steady, growing certainty that life, real life, was waiting for her beyond the frost. The snow had begun to melt, revealing the streets beneath that had been hidden for months. Patches of earth, frozen for so long, were now soft and dark, glistening with moisture. She stepped outside with a cautious optimism, the sunlight warming her face in a way she had almost forgotten. The wind still whispered, but it no longer carried the sharp bite of fear. She had survived storms, solitude, and the relentless cold, and now she felt the quiet power of life returning. He walked beside her, steady and unassuming, carrying a small bundle of food. She noticed the way he moved with purpose, careful yet relaxed, a presence that had become a pillar in her fragile world. Together they crossed the streets, watching icicles drip and puddles form, and she realized how long it had been since she had seen the city like this, not as a graveyard of memories, but as a place of potential. Even broken, even scarred, it held life, waiting for those who dared to notice it. As they walked, she felt her heart open in ways she hadn't thought possible. The fear that had clung to her for months, the fear of being alone, the fear of loss, the fear that warmth was just an illusion, began to dissipate. She felt the strength in knowing she had someone beside her who would not abandon her, someone who had given her not just protection, but belief in the possibility of a better life. Every glance he offered, every small gesture of care, was a reminder that humans could be more than survival. They could be hope, warmth, and even home. They found a small park, trees bending slightly under the weight of melting snow. She knelt to touch the wet grass, letting the sensation of life, soft and cool, seep into her fingertips. It was a simple act, but it felt monumental. She had once feared touch, warmth, and connection, yet now she embraced it, reveling in the reminder that life still existed and that she could participate in it. She laughed softly, a sound that blended with the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant drip of melting snow, and the sound startled her. It was free, pure, and unafraid. He smiled at her, a quiet smile full of understanding. "You've come so far," he said. "You're not just surviving anymore, you're alive." The words struck her heart, and she realized he was right. For months she had moved through life like a ghost, carried only by instinct and stubbornness. But now she felt the pulse of living, not just existing, but seeing, feeling, and embracing the world again. She understood that the cold had taken much from her, but it had not taken everything. The ember of hope, once nearly extinguished, had grown into a steady flame. They spent the afternoon walking through the city, helping each other clear small paths, discovering small corners where life had persisted. A few birds chirped hesitantly, the sun reflected off puddles, and she even found a small patch of wildflowers breaking through the snow. Each detail was a reminder that the world still held beauty, still held possibility. The human's hand brushed hers accidentally, and she did not pull away. Instead, she held it, feeling the warmth of flesh and heart alike, the simple assurance that she was no longer alone. As the sun set, painting the sky with pinks and golds, they returned to the small room that had become her sanctuary. She looked around at the fire that burned steadily, at the blankets folded neatly, at the quiet order that had been built in chaos. She understood fully and clearly that this room, this warmth, this human, these were the gifts that had allowed her to rise from the cold. She had not only survived, she had been reborn. She turned to him and smiled, unguarded, complete. "I thought I had nothing left," she said softly. "But you gave me everything." The words were simple, yet full of weight, carrying months of fear, loss, and now gratitude. He nodded, understanding without needing more, and she felt the full force of something she had believed lost forever: trust, hope, and the promise of life beyond suffering. Night fell, soft and quiet, but it no longer felt oppressive. She curled near the fire, no longer trembling, no longer afraid of the cold. Outside, snow continued to melt, rivers began to form, and life crept back into the city. She realized that the cold had taken much, but it had also shown her the power of human kindness, of protection, and of warmth beyond mere fire. Somewhere in this harsh world, humans could be miracles, capable of restoring hope when everything else seemed lost. And as she drifted to sleep, a smile resting on her face, she knew one truth. She was alive, truly alive, and the warmth, care, and hope she had found would never leave her again.